Uh, Welcome to Return on Podcast, where we talk about the experiences, obsessions, and habits of the most successful e-commerce entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Tyler Jefcoat, and I want to welcome you to this episode of ROP. You've heard of return on investment. What you haven't heard of is return on podcast. We're going to give you nuggets, habits, practices that will guarantee you an ROI on the time you spend with us. Thank you for being here today. In today's episode, we're going to talk about using Amazon data to drive better decision-making, drive better profitability with your advertising. We're going to talk about the art and science of being a parallel entrepreneur. And of course, we're going to talk about Star Wars since today is May the 4th. My guest today, good friend, Brandon Checketts. Brandon, you call yourself a parallel entrepreneur. You've started over 40 businesses in your career. You currently have 10 operating. By the way, Brandon was my core investor and is now not just my co-founder, but a partner and seller accountant. You spend most of your time, homie, trying to herd cats and keep things going at Seller Labs, which is one of the real dominant players when it comes to software in the Amazon space. And you're a data geek, intersection of data geek and helping e-commerce sellers make data-driven decisions. Welcome to the show, buddy. How are you doing?
Well, that was a long introduction. Thank you, Tyler. It's good to be here. I always love talking with you, and I feel like we don't get a chance to talk as often as we should. So this is nice.
I know it's it's funny. It's funny, Brandon. Brandon has Brandon is actually my business partner, right? We actually spend lots of time thinking about business together, but we don't actually get in the same room even remotely that often. So good to have you, pal. So listen, and Caleb, I just agree. May the 4th be with you. I've got my Star Wars shirt, got my Vader mug. I'm ready. We're ripping and roaring, making the difference. By the way, if you are joining us live here, feel free to add any questions as we go along here. All right, Brandon, as we start our discussion today, help me with something here. Define what you mean when you say that you refer to yourself as a parallel entrepreneur.
I think most people have heard the term serial entrepreneur before, which means you kind of like start a business, finish it, move on to the next one. I kind of do that, but multiple things at the same time. So right now I've got, I don't know however you want to count them, maybe 6 or 7 businesses going at one point and the other. I count seller accountant among one of those that I'm a partner with, but I've got great people that, they're running that one. So there's, I've got that happening in multiple things. I happen to be running Seller Labs right now is one of the bigger ones that we have going on, but there's several other businesses that I have going on at any given point in time. So that's what I call a parallel entrepreneur, I guess.
So what are you learning? Because I feel like it's something you and I talk about a lot, but what are you learning about really being successful, trying to operate multiple investment interests? How do you strike that balance between kind of being remote and removed so that your time isn't kind of tied up versus needing to be dialed in so that things actually perform well?
Well, I think there's a couple things that make that possible. Number one is hiring and having great people with you. So you got to have people that you respect and trust and can have honest conversations with to lead those. And I think another one of the key ones is having good financial good business metrics in general, but financial metrics specifically to know how things are going, and not just having good metrics, but like having a very high degree of confidence in those too.
Yeah. So let's talk about. I'm going to use a little bit of your story, Brandon, to kind of help people connect the dots because we are going to spend some time talking about, data and Amazon execution here. But would you tell us a little bit of your story about how you got into the Amazon game, and then obviously how that kind of pivots into the software business that you're in now?
Sure. So my background, and I was basically one of the guys that played with computers and stuff when I was in high school and whatever, played video games, built computers, started a computer store with the help of my parents when I was 16, really had a background in computers, started doing more stuff with like programming and stuff, thanks to a mentor while I was just graduated out of college. Had the opportunity to work sort of freelance for a while, and then got into the book industry because of a price comparison site I wrote once called bookscouter.com. So sort of went from computer geek to internet e-commerce stuff, specifically in the textbook industry. And then, like most people that were in books at some point, they end up selling on Amazon. So we go from books to Amazon. And then what we really found was the book business was a kind of cutthroat business, and any kind of inventory-based business is kind of your growth is limited by the amount of capital that you have. But the software businesses are much more put a bunch of capital in up front and get rewards over the long term and see growth over long term. That doesn't require as much capital. At least at the time, we didn't think so. It didn't require as much capital to scale. So putting all that work in up front on the getting a product out was been what most of my things have been doing for the last 10 years or so.
And then when you were selling on Amazon, I guess I have so many things I'd love to share with the audience here, because your story is amazing, Brandon. You're the perfect blend, by the way, of like hacker developer, but also kind of a scrappy seller by nature. Like you are, for those of you guys who don't know Brandon, like literally we close an office and Brandon's the guy in there, like meticulously wrapping every single cable, cord, and like chair for potential resell. Like you're just scrappy. Like I think you fit the ethos of the like standard Amazon seller of just how do you intersect technology and like trying to find ways to make money. And like, if I'm remembering correctly, that happened pretty early for you, right? I mean, you were like this guy that even in like middle school, high school was like trying to find ways to buy and sell things. Like this kind of like seller ethic has kind of been with you for a while, right?
Yeah, I people have asked me like, did I something growing up develop that? I don't know what it was. It's always just been kind of part of my nature to be interested in business and selling things and finding, not just selling things, but finding ways to create value. Even, every job I've had, I think I would try to, even if you're not selling something on in e-commerce world, you're trying to develop as an employee somewhere, you should figure out how to like create value in your job and your position to make your job more valuable for your employer. So there's always some element of like value creation there, figuring out like what it is, why it is you're there, and what benefit you provide, and increasing and focusing on optimizing that value proposition.
Yeah, when I think of like, I was just thinking about you, Brandon. The three traits that I think about when I think about you that make you innately a great entrepreneur, and is one of the reasons I really respect you, are one, you're willing to take risk and try new things. You're not afraid to fail and pivot. Number two is you actually have some value generating DNA that makes it hard, I think, for you to work for people who want to put you in a box. Like, right, like you need to have your own path, which is something I identify with you on also. And then kind of back to the idea of pivoting, is I've seen so many elements of your career, even like, because Brandon, I knew you as a CEO of another company when we were in a mastermind together, and just seeing how you were able to pivot. I mean, do you mind sharing like the like Book Scout or pivot story? Is that something you can like share? Like this guy, like you repurposed some code and basically like built a monster business because you were just like, yeah, oops, I can't do this the way I used to. I mean, do you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how far back you are referring to or wanting to go, but one of the things, so before I could create a Book Scouter, I actually was selling virtual currency on eBay when Star Wars Galaxies and World of Warcraft were the big multi-massively player games at the time. So I'm trying to think, probably 2004, 2005 timeframe or stuff. So I had a website where I was buying virtual currency from people in a video game and selling it on eBay for real dollars. And that's kind of just crashed. One of the days, the game was run by Sony, and Sony said that's not allowed, and they canceled my account. So I had, I don't know, probably $5,000 to $10,000 worth of virtual currency that just disappeared because I couldn't log into my account anymore. And so I kind of pivoted from that towards, and I had a bunch of technology. And so I pivoted from actually selling virtual currency to doing a price comparison site for virtual currency for other vendors that were still live and doing it. And then when the time for Book Scatter came out, I sort of pivoted that code from price comparison for virtual currency and made it as a price comparison website for textbooks. So just kind of, I don't know, I think that's what you're referring to, is like the piece of code you reused several different times. So, and adapted each time.
Yeah, I love that, because what you did was you basically found a way to solve a problem. Sony says you don't get to solve that problem anymore because you're disrupting the virtual economy of our game. Yeah. And so you take that code that's objectively on one front like an entrepreneurial failure, and yet it also becomes a pivot opportunity for you to take that code, take that scalable problem solver, and apply it to textbooks, and then your ability to position yourself alongside even huge companies. Like there used to be a textbooks.com that pre-deceased many businesses for lots of reasons. And so obviously you're selling books, you're pivoting some of your expertise into Amazon. Talk to me about your the like genesis of Feedback Genius and how really that product got launched.
Sure. Let me switch back to the right. I might touch something here. So at one point we were selling books. Obviously, we were buying a bunch of products from the United States Postal Service. They have basically the USPS ships millions and millions and millions of things, and they lose a very small percentage of those. But still, a small percentage of millions and millions of things is still a lot of stuff that gets lost in the mail. And so my co-founder of Seller Labs and I, Paul Johnson, we bought stuff at the USPS Mail Recovery Center, which is where those lost items go. They auction them off they used to be every month. And so we were buying books for a while, but one of the things in particular we were buying was, they called it loose mixed media. And it was basically just CDs and DVDs that were lost in the mail. And they just had the plastic disc, but no artwork, no covers, no cases, no anything. So we were buying 40-pound totes of these discs. It's thousands of discs, and found that we could, with a few minutes of work, list them, figure out what the media was, list it on Amazon. We would buy them. We would buy a 40-pound tote was probably $200 or something, and probably had 4,000 discs in it. So our cost on each disc was pretty small, but we could sell them on Amazon for even a penny at the time. You could sell them for a penny and make money on the shipping. So as we did that, though, we found that we listed them on Amazon, and we would say in our description that they were, used, didn't have the original artwork or the cases, but we still would have a good number of people complain about it when they were after they received them, saying, "I thought I was getting a disc with a case or something." So what I ended up writing over a weekend one time was we were already ingesting all the Amazon orders and stuff into our own system to ship them. And so I just added a component on that where if the product was one of these particular types of products, I could tell because of the SKU we had on it. If it was one of those kind of products, we would send an email as soon as possible after the item was purchased, and we would email the customer and say, "We know you purchased this product, and we wanted to make sure that you realized that it didn't have any artwork and it was just shipped in a generic case. If you cared about the artwork, then please cancel the order before we ship it and save us all the trouble," right? And then we found that was actually effective at reducing our negative feedback that we got, and that sort of evolved into the original version of Feedback Genius that launched Seller Labs.
Love it. And so Seller Labs has evolved a few iterations since then. You're now back at the helm running Seller Labs. Give us a quick update. What's hot right now with Seller Labs and what you're seeing in terms of driving performance for Amazon brands?
Yeah, well, the thing we're really excited about right now, which is actually funny, it's actually one of the very first things we had on when we launched Feedback Genius, was basically well, nowadays it's called a data warehouse. Back in the day, it was just a database we connect to. But we're actually opening up the database and as a data warehouse so that people can connect to and use their data without having to import it all and everything. So we're already ingesting all those reports, the transaction reports and order reports and return reports and advertising reports, and we have that all in the database, and we're opening that up so customers can actually just connect to the database directly and use any kind of third-party reporting tools to get at that data. And I'm really excited. We actually just launched a Google Sheets extension too, so you can actually connect to your data directly in Google Sheets, so that you can just see it right there without having to download and upload and import stuff. So that's what I'm pretty excited about. We just launched that in the last couple of weeks.
And is that different than the FBA Analyzer? Is that a different tool?
Yeah. So I think I talked about this other product that we used to get another. I started another Amazon business back in 2010 or something with my brother Jordan, and that's another one of those where we had some access, just as an example of like how data provides opportunities. I wrote a tool way back then that was based on a different API, Amazon's product advertising API, and it would pull in it would pull in the item that was for sale and the number of units that were available for sale on Amazon. And we watched that every hour or something, and we could essentially tell how many units sold. If we could say there was 32 in stock last hour and there's 30 in stock this hour, we would assume that 2 sold in the last hour. I mean, by watching something over time, we were able to pretty concretely say the sales velocity of things. This was before a lot of other third-party tools were doing this. This was 2007, 2008, 2010, somewhere in their time frame. So we had a pretty awesome tool that helped us estimate sales velocity. And we use that sales velocity to go to manufacturers and make fairly large orders that we thought at the time, tens of thousands of dollars orders for something that was brand new to e-commerce, with a high degree of confidence that we'd be able to sell those. So
yeah, it's kind of using the data to get almost an unfair competitive advantage, right? So that you can launch it. So speaking of competitive advantage, I mean, the advertising landscape has evolved so much since Seller Labs, and then the Ignite product and the Seller Labs Pro. That's really key now. Walk us through what you're seeing right now, kind of some examples of reducing advertising, or what is it taking for Amazon brands to really increase their profits right now? What's working, what's not working? What's on your mind, man?
well, I mean, what we've kind of seen from our customer base, and we have a services team that manages advertising and stuff for a lot of customers as well. So what we've kind of seen, and I think we see this story in the larger Amazon market, as we talk about aggregators and how they've affected the marketplace over the last several years, is growth. Growth has been a primary driver. Like, everybody's just been grow mode, and it's been fairly I don't know, it's easy to do that, but there's been a pretty predictable way to do that by advertising. If you out advertise other people, you get more placement, you make more sales. But I think what we've seen, and Amazon's advertising has gone from, they used to be like the fourth biggest advertiser on the planet to, like, I don't know what they are now, number 2 or something, maybe number 1. I don't know. But their advertising business has gone from nothing to gargantuous over the course of the last 5 years. So what we're kind of seeing is that a bigger focus on profit now. So instead of just advertising and growing for the sake of growth, to pull back a little bit and say, like, just let's advertise on the things that are actually profitable for us. Yeah. Instead of advertising on all the keywords, let's figure out the keywords that we can actually that are super important for us to win on, and then be more targeted or surgical and figuring out which ones we're going to expand on and try to grow at, and taking a more granular approach to that a little bit. So by reducing your overall advertising, you actually can increase your profits pretty significantly. So.
Yeah, it's funny. We've seen this in the CFO practice recently, Brandon. There's this, we call it the kind of insanity flywheel, right? Where, because supply chains, lead times, and freight costs are so high, and because actually here in Q1, demand has been flat and in some categories down a little bit. Literally, session numbers are down in a couple of categories. The wrong response to that is called the insanity flywheel, where you just spend twice as much as your competitors to buy the traffic for the limited buyers that are available, only to run out of inventory and pay 3 times the normal cost for a container to rush ship more inventory. And that's a bad way to run a business in a bit of a bearish market. The right way, and I think we're seeing a lot of this across the board, Brandon, is to reprioritize margin, reprioritize return on investment, and don't get trapped in the more is not always better is better, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's easy to look at the top line sales numbers and see that's easy. If your top line sales numbers are going up, it's always easy to justify more of what you've been doing, more sales, more everything. But if your expenses have gone up, and you're talking about advertising expenses, you're talking about transportation expenses, if those things go up, then you're actually losing money on every unit you sell. Like, it doesn't make sense to keep on advertising.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think that's kind of the trend that we've seen over the last year to 6 months that we're adjusting things for.
Anything else you can think about that your clients or your brother's company or anything else you're thinking about right now tactically that's been either a focus, an emphasis, or something that sellers can do that's actually helping them improve profitability right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just comes down to getting really understanding on a we call it unit economics, looking at it on a per SKU basis and understanding, like, how those unit economics play out. Because again, for somebody that's got a big catalog, or maybe not even a big catalog, maybe a catalog of either 10 or 20 items, what we see a lot of times is, 2 or 3 of those are their main driver of revenue. And they may have, it's usually kind of like the 80-20 rule. 20% of the products bring in 80% of the revenue. And I think when I've had previous conversations with you, we've called it return on working capital. If we think about, okay, we might have 100,000, maybe this product provides $100,000 a year in net profit for us. But if you have to have $1 million in capital to get that $100,000, that's not as good of a product for you as a product that requires $100,000 in capital to get $100,000 return. So it's being a little bit more selective about your catalog and how you treat your the available SKUs you have as well. So we see, I think some people pull down if you've got a unit with like size and color variations, like trimming the number of color variations you have, because that's just a lot of times inventory that's sitting in and not as profitable as your main colors are. So that's one of the other ways we're talking about, not just cutting your expenses, but also reducing your capital that you have, working capital that you have in the business, to get it to have a better return on working capital.
Yeah, and that kind of relates to what you said earlier, where I asked you the question, what is a parallel entrepreneur? How do you kind of manage these multiple interests? And one of the answers to that you gave is you got to have clarity on the financial performance of your assets. And I think the most successful e-commerce CEOs right now are the guys and gals who actually treat their product lines like investments, right? They actually do what you just described, Brandon, which is the numerator is not enough. Yes, I'm going to make some profit on this brand over the course of a year, but understanding the context of that profit against the denominator, which is the amount invested. I don't, to reiterate what you just said, Brandon, I don't know whether $100,000 of profit in a year is a smiley face or a frowny face event unless I know how much money I have invested in the product and understanding on average how much inventory I'm having to carry, how much deposits, how much is sitting in the LA harbor, right, waiting to get into the port.
That can be a really hard number to monitor and to measure on a regular basis, because you do have, a lot of times like your inventory numbers are a little bit hard to obtain because you've got inventory in FBA warehouses, you've got lost inventory, you've got inventory on the water, you've got inventory you prepaid for. Just trying to come up with how much you have invested is not always an easy question to answer. So
that's right. And it's one of those that's probably worth the effort to try to triangulate. And I think part of this also, Brandon, that you mentioned earlier, is it's never been more important to have a great handle on your Amazon data. Just guys, a PSA that everyone that would listen to this knows, but Amazon does delete your campaign level advertising data. Was it, Brandon, after 60 days, 90 days, something like that?
Yeah, I think they allow you to see some of it, like a very, very high level account wide stuff in Seller Central for a long time, but the detailed stuff at the campaign level and certainly down to the keyword level is gone after 60 days or so.
So this is super important. Like as we help clients get through due diligence, or we've even helped some investors diligence assets in the last year. Here's a case study, Brandon. We had a client that wanted to sell one brand and not the whole portfolio out of their Seller Central account. They had okay accounting, right? But it was really difficult for them to sell their story to the investor to say, hey, these 5 ASINs that I actually want to sell you, I promise I didn't spend nearly as much on the advertising for those 5 as I did on the rest of them. Well, guess what? They really didn't have an easy way to validate that because the campaign level data within Seller Central wasn't there. And so for them, having a tool like what Seller Labs provides, or having some kind of a database tool where you're actively managing, storing, warehousing your campaign level data, and not just warehousing it in case you might need it for due diligence, but actually using that data. And maybe that's another question I would have for you quickly, Brandon. If somebody is starting to gather that data, maybe they already have Seller Labs or another tool where they're gathering it. Like any advice on like tactically how you should be using that data to make better choices and actually drive profitability in the brand?
I mean, that really comes down to understanding what data is available. So sometimes like sales data is pretty easy to get at. So if you wanted to go download order reports from 3 years ago, I think you probably still can, right? But looking at, so it's a lot of it's about just having ready access to the data, because it's not that the data is not available. It's just a pain to try and, if you want to get a holistic picture of your business, you have to download order reports, you have to download advertising reports and keep those. You have to turn on return reports and financial reports and advertising, or like promotional reports. There's all these sorts of different things you have to do to get a good sense of your business. And so this is the reason we created our data warehouses, but we're automatically ingesting all those kinds of reports and storing them in there for 3 years or something.
Cool.
So that you always have the ability to go year over year and back for quite a long ways, that you'd have all your relevant data. So unless you're doing that, in the case of advertising reports, like you talked about, like there would be no way to recreate those unless you could like find the Excel file that you downloaded 9 months ago. Like that would be very hard. And so what our data warehouse does is just kind of like takes all that thought and effort and it just does it in the background, and it's always up to date, and it's always the amount of history you need.
No, that's so good. I mean, and again, you mentioned this earlier, Brandon, but I think the days of really, really simple hacks giving you an advantage, knowing what your competitors are selling and that kind of thing, Those days are a little bit more challenging now because of how many competitors we have in each category, how much software is available. But it's actually never been more important to find creative ways to use really deep data to make objective choices about where to spend your money in advertising. Even the how question we were talking about, well, prioritize profitability. Well, how do you do that? The way you do that is you actually use data to know which of your products are generating the unit economics that you want, and prioritize spending money where you can afford to spend money, and don't just buy real estate where you're losing dollars per unit sold.
Yep.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on that, Brandon, in terms of just driving profitability in Amazon business in general right now?
Well, I think one of the other things to promote advertising a little bit, like the advertising tools that are out there and the advertising opportunities you have are more varied and granular than they ever have been, right? So
Yeah.
if you have, it used to be you had to have $10,000 a month of ad spend or something to launch a display ad on Amazon's display network. But you can do that now much more incrementally, and you can just spend $100 a month to do that right now if you have the right tools and the right permissions and everything with brand registry and all the other things that go with that. So you can be a little more. You can actually do some of the things that the big guys can do as far as like retargeting people across the web and some things like that you wouldn't have been able to do a couple of years ago. So there's actually more opportunity to do there. But every one of those things requires like specialized knowledge and skill and experience to be able to do it well. So it's a pretty big learning curve, or a lot of people we find are hiring an agency or something to help manage that. So
it is one of those things that if you're not an expert, you probably need to become one or hire one, or it's going to be tough to keep up. Brandon, most important question I'm going to ask you today is, when did you first become a Disney fanatic?
That's a good question. So I grew up in Utah. My parents would take us to Disneyland every few years, I guess. I remember probably going to Disneyland 4 or 5 times. So I always kind of liked it. And then in college, I actually did what Disney World had a college program where for a semester you could go off and go work at Disney World for a semester. So I did that for a semester when I was probably a sophomore or something in college, and worked at the Magic Kingdom parking lot, and that kind of elevated me to super fan, I guess, at that point. So loved being there, loved working there. It was a super fun place to be as a 20-something-year-old. Just lots of stuff to do there, and it's been a part of what we love to do ever since. So
It's so funny, man. I mean, if you can work a summer job parking cars for a corporation, and as a result become a lifelong spirited fan of that brand, that does definitely says something for the quality of that brand, doesn't it?
yeah, it does. So I mean, it was obviously a super fun place to visit. Just like that, those things are just tied with fun emotional things and fond memories and stuff like that. So that's where a lot of it goes, that you want to share that with your kids and family. So my whole family, my brothers and sisters and mom and dad are all pretty big Disney fans now. So I think it was a little bit of a thing when we were growing up, but now everybody's loves doing it. So
This is what I hear, Brandon. If you want to see Brandon Checketts, who, in case you guys can't pick this up, is a fairly left brain, like subdued kind of personality. But if you want to see him act like a fourth grader, get him in the one of the Disney parks, and get around stuff. So the Disney dining part of this. So obviously I know you own another company called Mouse Dining where you do that stuff. But how did you that's such a fascinating question. That's a great example, by the way, the Mouse Dining story of how you took your kind of hobby passion and your skill set and kind of tried to form into a business. I mean, to give us a little bit of an anecdote about that. How did that get?
yeah, I mean, so one of the things we try to do is going down to Disney World, and to dining reservations are kind of a rare commodity there. It's been kind of hard to get dining reservations. If you wanted to go eat at Cinderella's castle, or you wanted to go eat with Anna and Elsa, those dining reservations fill up really quickly. So one of the things they did on one of the trips is we would go to Disney's site and then just check the website every 5 minutes, and would send me a text message if availability showed up for a desire for our date and time that we wanted. So I ended up creating that into an application called Mouse Dining, and that was created, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. It's been a while, but that business has been doing great and amazing lately. As dining reservations get harder to find. The value of the supply and demand there's more demand than there is supply. So that's been a fun business as we actually get pretty well connected to Disney fans and their desires and trends and stuff like that. It's been fun to see that go well and grow.
Love it. Final personal question, and then we'll talk about some hacks. So, favorite Star Wars movie and why?
Oh boy. I would say my first one is episode 4, A New Hope, just because it's kind of the classic, the one that started it all. So
The
still
original.
still got a great story that still just works over, what is it, 40 years later. So
It's funny. You go back and watch that movie right now. And by the way, it is May the 4th. So you guys have got to watch. You're mandated as a Return on Podcast listener to watch at least one Star Wars movie in the next week. My commitment to you guys is this weekend we're going to watch one with our kids. I don't know which one it'll be right now because they love Rey, so it might be one of the newer ones. But yeah, that first movie, think about how like absolutely disruptive Lucas's technology and the like really campy door opening and closing scenes were, but it like worked, and the trash compactor scene and the princess and everything was just such a absolutely novel idea, and obviously has become one of the greatest franchises in entertainment history. So
yeah, it's super fun. That's another one I'll be in. And then Disney bought Star Wars, so then it was kind of like two things for me in one. So Disney and Star Wars.
I know, it's like, wow, if I wasn't already a super fan. So all right, that's awesome, dude. Thank you so much for sharing. It's really been great to get to know you and talk to you a little bit on the show here. But here's where I want to pivot for kind of our last section. We do this every week. We end with the ROP, the Return on Podcast section of the show. And what we're looking for here, Brandon, is what are the things that, I mean, you're a really successful guy. I can say this as somebody who knows you personally. You are great at doing the things you want to do. And I'm just wondering what has given you an unusual return on investment in your life that you would say, man, if you can apply this, people, it'll guarantee you a return on this podcast?
Yeah, well, I think, and this is one of the reasons that we started Seller Accountant, right? Is that I found years ago when people were running e-commerce businesses, they didn't know how well that they were doing, and e-commerce businesses are particularly complicated because they've got a large amount of dollars tied up in inventory and capital. So the one thing that I would say is the most foundational to running a successful business is having honest financial numbers that you have a high degree of confidence in. And there's always a tendency, even when you're talking about yourself, to think about the best case scenario for those numbers. But you really just got to be honest, brutally honest with them, understand how things are going, and when things aren't going well, you don't just kind of like explain it away as like, oh, but you really got to be honest and brutally honest with yourself, and understanding those and digging into those and having a great amount of confidence in those numbers, because they drive, especially as I'm doing like multiple businesses at once. Like I don't have the opportunity to be in the middle in the weeds of every one of those. So I got to have confidence in those numbers to know how things are going. And my favorite financial report to look at is a month over month profit and loss on an accrual basis. So if you've got your accrual, if you're accruing stuff correctly and you read a month over month P&L for the last 12 months or 15 months or something, you get a pretty clear story of what that business has been going through over the last year.
Yep.
So
yeah, it's so funny. By the way, the fact that you have a pet financial statement is actually a good sign, right? I mean, it's fine. But you're right, Brandon. It's if your financial statements are not correcting you occasionally, in other words, if they're not telling you bad news that changes the way you run your business occasionally, maybe not all the time, but occasionally, then you are living in a entrepreneurial vacuum where you're always believing your own BS, and there's a real danger that you're in trouble. And so I think, you and I are optimistic guys, Brandon. We've started multiple businesses, both of us, and most entrepreneurs that are like us want to believe that the glass is half full. We want to be optimistic. We want to believe that our story will push through. And because our teams are depending on us to not fail, we tend to be the ones that are kind of rah, don't give up, guys. We're going to do it. We can be fine. The danger is when we couple that mentality with a lack of real clarity. What we end up with is a situation where we're driving a car with mud on the windshield. And, if you're in the middle of Nevada in the desert, you might be able to drive straight in a desert with mud on your windshield for some amount of time, but eventually you're going to crash. And you're sure as heck not going to get wherever you're trying to go. And Brandon, I just affirm what you said. Obviously, I'm a bookkeeping CFO boy here, but like having really clear financials that occasionally tell you really bad news that make you change what you're doing are crucial to running a business.
The other thing that I'll say that complements that too is like momentum is a real thing, right? Like I see a lot of businesses, and I've been in the middle of many businesses that were innovative or did something amazing years ago, and they've got momentum from that. And that momentum is carrying them forward, and the numbers look good, but what you're doing today is not helping you to build that momentum or keep it up. And so that's one of the challenges that I see often in business owners, and especially in e-commerce businesses, is you did something great years ago, and that momentum is carrying you forward. And even telling some of your numbers will look like you're doing fine.
Yeah.
But some of the ones that are important are actually telling you that you're going to have a down year next year or something. So paying attention to what those are and that's where we get into some of those more nuanced and complicated numbers, as return on working capital, and some of those things are more complicated. It's really easy to look at some numbers and say things are going great, but it's harder to look at your numbers and say, I see some downsides of this, and we need to really pay attention to those.
Well, and another practical anecdote to that point, Brandon, is my team is going through the 4 Disciplines of Execution right now. If you haven't read the book, it's really good. But that's another reason we don't think about this as often. That's another reason why focusing on lead measures is so important, because if we just focus on the lag measures, that's kind of the results. It can give us a false negative or a false positive. Like, first of all, a lag measure has already happened by the time you see the report, and so you can't take a lot of action on it. But also, the lag measure may give you a rosier picture than is true. And I'll give you an example of this from Seller Accountant last year. We had some unusual income come in that allowed me as a leader to ignore some challenges that we had in our organization for a few months, right? I mean, we're making money. We're happy. We're making money. And it's amazing how what you said, Brandon, can be true even for an e-commerce brand. We're like, wow, that one lightning deal, maybe I'm still getting kind of a halo effect from it. Or maybe my one hero product, what I don't realize is that my competitor has one on a boat in the ocean about to compete with me, but I'm making money right now, so I'm not going to need to feel the urgency to make changes. But that's really not the right way to run your business. You've got to be focusing on the things that will impact the future numbers. And, again, make sure A, that you can see the performance, and B, that you have the courage to take a look under the rocks that you don't want to look under and make changes before it becomes a problem.
Yeah. I mean, to make that a little bit more real is what I often see is the hero product becomes less and less profitable. But other lines of business they're starting other products that make revenue go up a lot of times, but they don't. A lot of times it's hard to see that hero product is not doing as well because of the advertising and stuff. So that's the common mistake. I think that's, if any of your e-commerce sellers listening to this I would challenge you to take a look at it. Like that hero product, maybe that's the one where I'm saying, like, you did something great years ago and you're still reaping benefits from it. But what you're doing today, as far as like innovating new products or innovating on that product or whatever, is maybe not going as well as it should, but your numbers are still up and to the right, so that things look good, but you need to look a little bit underneath the covers, underneath the hood, to see what's going on.
So I remember when I took a driver's ed in high school, they're talking about, like, you may be way off from a red light or a green light, red light, but if it's been green forever, you call it like a stale green light, where you should be prepared to maybe stop your car because it could turn red before you get there. The point is that if you've had a hero product that's succeeding for more than 3 or 4 years, more than 2 or 3 years, you would almost want to consider that a stale green light. There is probably going to be a change on the horizon, whether it's from your competitors or from the algorithm or from the USDA or whoever it is that might put pressure on your margins. And if you're not continuing to hustle to make your next success story, you're not going to be able to ride the coattails of that first story forever. Don't be surprised by that. That's going to happen. Every company, like Seller Accountant, is not going to exist forever. Amazon, Bezos's recent shareholder letter, he forecasts that Amazon won't last for more than 30 years, right? I mean, the reality is that everything is being disrupted. We're arrogant if we think that our hero product isn't also ripe for disruption, and we got to continually iterate and get better, or somebody will, right?
Right. So,
all right. Well, we'll leave you with that. Brandon, I'm really grateful for your time today. Thanks for joining. Hey, if anyone wants to learn more about Seller Labs, the new data tool you have, even the managed services, what's the best way for them to dig in more and find ways to partner with your companies?
Well, sure. So, like, obviously you can go to our website, sellerlabs.com. We've got links there for our managed services team. If you're having challenges with advertising or just want an expert to handle that, we're actually offering a new tier of service that's more focused on your profitability, to make sure we understand all your costs in there and make sure you're actually running things profitable. And then our data warehouse tool, we're just in the process of launching that. So I would just say subscribe to our newsletters and stuff, or you can go to sellerlabs.com/data warehouse to have some stuff on that. But we'll expect more marketing and more materials to come out as we're getting more material out about how to use that.
Brandon, you're the man, buddy. Thank you for joining me today. And for those of you guys listening to this show, thank you for joining Return on Podcast with me, Tyler Jefcoat. Guys, if this content has served you or brings you any clarity in your business, or if you just want to help me out and rep this podcast, please consider sharing it, liking it, sending it to your friends. And with that, Brandon, we're going to close the episode. Everyone have a great week and kill it. We'll talk to you next Wednesday.